The morning was crisp, the kind of September day that made the air feel electric, carrying a sharpness that filled the lungs with every inhale. Clara parked her old sedan near the far end of the outdoor range, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The sun had barely risen, sending streaks of gold across the dewy grass, painting the metal targets in dazzling patterns. The world was quiet except for the occasional call of a distant bird and the soft hum of traffic far beyond the range's fenced boundaries. Clara stepped out, stretching her shoulders, feeling the familiar sense of anticipation that always accompanied her shooting sessions. There was a rhythm she had learned to crave: the methodical placement of targets, the careful inspection of her firearms, the precise calculation of angles and distances. Shooting had been her refuge for years, a sanctuary where her mind could focus and her body could act without hesitation. She grabbed the canvas bag she had packed the night before. Inside, each piece of equipment had its place: the rangefinder, a carefully cleaned pistol, extra magazines, hearing protection, and a small notebook where she jotted observations about her shooting. Today's goal was simple: refine her stance, improve her aim at longer distances, and practice smooth, consistent trigger pulls. It was routine, yet each day carried its own subtle challenges. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder from earlier shooters, mingled with the earthy scent of grass and soil. Clara inhaled deeply and smiled. There was something comforting about the mixture of elements, the sensory markers of her chosen hobby. She loved the quiet intensity of the morning, the way it allowed her to focus entirely on her own capabilities, without distraction. As she unloaded her car and began setting up targets, Clara noticed the other shooters gradually arriving. Some waved, others offered a nod. She returned gestures politely, but kept her attention on the task at hand. Metal stands clinked as she arranged targets, carefully measuring distances with her tape measure. She aligned the bullseye perfectly, then adjusted the surrounding targets to ensure a gradual progression of difficulty. This methodical approach had helped her improve steadily over the years, building both skill and confidence. Once the targets were in place, Clara crouched to inspect the footing and angles, making subtle adjustments that could make all the difference when taking a shot. Every detail mattered: the angle of a target, the firmness of the ground under her feet, the slightest breeze. Today, the wind was minimal, just enough to be noticed, but not enough to disrupt her aim. She made a mental note: perfect conditions for precision work. While she was arranging her equipment, Clara sensed movement at the edge of the range. She glanced up, expecting to see a regular shooter, perhaps someone new who had arrived early. Instead, a man in tactical gear was walking steadily toward her. He moved differently than anyone else had: deliberate, controlled, confident, without being ostentatious. Clara's pulse quickened slightly, curiosity mingling with caution. He carried himself with a silent authority that set him apart from everyone else around. His boots made almost no sound on the gravel, and his eyes scanned the range with a practiced sharpness, taking in every detail without apparent effort. Clara wondered briefly if he was a trainer or someone associated with the range. There were few explanations for a civilian moving with such precision. The stranger didn't speak immediately. He walked past a few of the other shooters, who instinctively stepped back, their greetings faltering in his presence. Clara felt a flicker of unease, but quickly dismissed it, telling herself she had nothing to fear. Shooting had taught her focus, discipline, and calm under pressure. Still, something about his presence was magnetic, demanding attention even without words. Clara returned to her targets, pretending not to notice him, though she stole glances occasionally. The man paused a few meters away, observing her from a distance. His gaze wasn't intrusive, but it carried an intensity that made her heart beat a little faster. She adjusted her stance, feeling a mix of nervousness and exhilaration. The ritual she knew so well suddenly seemed more significant, as if her every action were under a silent, precise evaluation. The sound of bullets striking. Metal broke the momentary tension, a sharp reminder of the normalcy she had come for. Clara raised her pistol and took aim, focusing on her breathing, letting the familiar sensations wash over her. She felt the rhythm, the inhale, the steady squeeze of the trigger, the satisfying thunk of impact. It was grounding, reassuring. And yet she remained aware of the stranger, whose presence hung like a silent question in the morning air. As she worked through her warm-up, Clara's mind wandered briefly, wondering about him. He carried no visible identification, no obvious affiliation. Yet there was something unmistakable about the way he moved, the precision in his posture, the way his eyes never wavered from observing. He wasn't just competent, he was highly trained. Clara couldn't place exactly why, but instinct whispered the truth. This was someone who had seen and done things she couldn't imagine. She returned to adjusting targets, trying to shake off the distraction, but the rhythm had shifted. Every shot now carried an extra weight, a subtle awareness that she was performing under observation. Her hands were steady, her focus sharpened, and she realized that the stranger's silent presence was changing her approach. Shooting had always been personal, almost meditative, but now it felt like a challenge one she was rising to meet. After finishing the last target, she crouched to inspect it closely. The steel was cold and smooth, the bullseye perfectly centered, a testament to her meticulousness. Clara straightened, brushing her hands on her jeans, and glanced at the stranger. Again, he was a few meters away, leaning slightly, hands relaxed, watching her movements like a shadow. The air between them seemed charged, silent but potent. Something was about to happen, though she didn't yet know what. She heard the faint click of a firearm being set down nearby. Clara looked up just in time to see him place a sleek rifle on the table beside hers. Her eyes widened. The weight of the moment hit her. He had handed her a weapon of incredible caliber, trusting her in a way that few would dare. She froze, caught between awe and apprehension. The rifle gleamed in the morning sun, perfectly balanced and lethal, a tool designed for precision and expertise. Clara's hands tingled as she considered the offer. Every instinct screamed caution, yet a spark of excitement flared. The stranger took a deliberate step back, hands empty, a silent invitation. No words were spoken. The air felt charged with possibility, a quiet tension that made her heart race. Clara's ordinary morning at the range had shifted irrevocably, evolving from routine practice to something extraordinary, an encounter that would push her skill, focus, and courage in ways she had never imagined. She inhaled deeply, weighing the decision. This was more than a test of aim, it was a test of trust, composure, and self-belief. Clara reached out slowly, fingers brushing the cold metal, feeling its balance and weight. Her pulse raced, yet she felt an unexpected calm beneath it, a clarity she rarely experienced outside her shooting routine. The stranger's eyes remained steady, observing without intrusion, silently conveying confidence and respect. And in that moment, Clara knew everything had changed. Today would be unlike any other. The quiet morning, the rhythmic practice, the peaceful solitude, they were gone. In their place stood a challenge, a gift, and an opportunity. She had no idea how this encounter would unfold, but one thing was certain. She was ready to face it. A man's presence at the range remained impossible to ignore. Clara's eyes kept darting toward him as she adjusted the rifle in her hands. The sun glinted off the metal of his tactical vest, revealing the faint outline of patches, though nothing clearly identifying him. His boots, heavy and precise, barely made a sound on the gravel, yet the movement carried authority. Each step he took seemed deliberate, calculated, as if measured against a rhythm only he could hear. Clara felt a shiver of anticipation run down her spine. For a long moment, neither spoke. Clara tried to return her focus to the targets, but every time she exhaled, her eyes flicked toward him. He was studying her, but not in a critical way. It was something else entirely, an almost imperceptible evaluation, the kind reserved for people who are learning, growing, or proving themselves. Clara's heartbeat quickened as she wondered, who was he? Why here? Why her? He paused a few meters from the table where her rifles rested, his stance casual, yet impossibly alert. There was no need for words. The quiet between them was heavy, charged. Clara could feel it like static in the air, the energy of someone who had been trained to notice the slightest deviation in posture, stance, or movement. He didn't smile, didn't frown, he simply observed. Clara realized she had never been in a situation like this. At other ranges, new shooters might glance, whisper, or seek advice, but no one had ever approached with such authority, carrying the kind of presence that commanded attention without a single word. The man's gaze held her, steady and unwavering, and she felt the first real rush of adrenaline of the morning. She adjusted her stance subconsciously, grounding herself, testing her grip on the rifle. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced. She tried to tell herself this was normal. He was probably just another shooter, but her instincts screamed otherwise. The calm precision in his posture, the subtle control in his movements, the way his eyes followed every nuance of her routine, these were not the traits of an ordinary civilian. Clara had seen enough documentaries, read enough articles, and even met military personnel casually. And yet this was different. This was professional. He finally stepped closer, placing something on the table next to her. Clara's eyes widened as she realized what it was. A rifle. Not the kind sold at sporting stores or the standard models she practiced with. This was a high-grade, professional weapon, designed for precision, control, and lethality. The metal gleamed under the sunlight, every line and curve hinting at its potential. Clara felt her breath catch. She had handled firearms before, but never like this. The stranger did not speak. Instead, he simply stepped back, leaving the weapon in her hand's reach. The gesture was clear. He was offering her a choice. A moment of trust, silent but profound. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Was this a test, a challenge, or simply an act of confidence? She wasn't sure, but instinctively she knew one thing. Refusing was not an option she could even consider. The rifle was heavier than she expected, yet balanced perfectly. She lifted it, feeling its weight settle naturally in her hands, the grip conforming to her fingers. Her pulse raced, but a strange calm followed it, a focused clarity that only intense concentration could bring. The stranger watched her, unmoving, a quiet presence behind the soft hum of distant traffic and birdsong. Every second stretched, the silence punctuated only by her shallow breaths and the occasional clink of metal from her own setup. Clara's training kicked in. She adjusted her stance, her body aligning naturally with the weapon. The targets she had set up seemed suddenly smaller, more distant, more exacting. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, testing the sight, and felt the subtle recoil as she prepared for a shot. Her first attempt would reveal everything: control, composure, focus. Her eyes flicked toward the stranger, who remained a few steps away, calm, unobtrusive, almost like a shadow. She inhaled deeply, counting a silent rhythm in her head. 1, 2, 3. The metal of the rifle pressed against her cheek, cool and steady. She exhaled, squeezing the trigger gently. The shot rang out, sharp and precise, echoing across the empty range. Clara's heart skipped a beat at the satisfying thump against the steel target. She felt a rush of exhilaration, realizing the potential she held in her hands. The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of approval flashing across his features before disappearing. He stepped back further, giving her space, letting her find her rhythm. Clara felt herself grow bolder, taking careful aim at a farther target. The rifle responded beautifully, each shot echoing like a controlled heartbeat. She was aware of the power, the weight, and the responsibility in her hands, yet she felt more alive than she had in years. Minutes passed, but they felt like seconds. Clara's focus sharpened, her breathing synchronized with each shot. The stranger occasionally adjusted his stance, his eyes moving with subtle precision, observing her every movement, but never intruding. She noticed the faint tension in the muscles along his arms, the relaxed alertness in his posture, the way he was ready to act, yet chose not to. Every motion communicated experience, control, and authority. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying the weight of quiet authority. Grip your stance tighter. Your elbows need to anchor. Control comes from your base, not just your hands. Clara listened intently, absorbing each word. It wasn't criticism. It was guidance, precise and intentional. She adjusted her position, feeling the difference immediately. The shots flew. Truer, hitting the bullseyes with greater consistency. Her pulse slowed, replaced by focus and exhilaration, the satisfaction of learning from someone who clearly knew his craft. Clara realized she had crossed into a different level of practice. She was no longer simply shooting. She was performing, learning, testing herself under the scrutiny of someone who demanded excellence silently. Her adrenaline surged, but she controlled it, letting the calm precision take over. The stranger nodded faintly, an almost imperceptible gesture of respect. As the session continued, Clara felt a transformation. The routine morning practice she had known for years now seemed trivial compared to this. She was being challenged in ways she had never imagined, tested not just in skill, but in composure, awareness, and focus. Every shot became a meditation, every adjustment a lesson. And the stranger remained a silent mentor, guiding her without a word, watching, waiting, allowing her to rise to the moment. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was only minutes, Clara lowered the rifle. She was breathing deeply, her muscles pleasantly fatigued, her mind buzzing with adrenaline and awareness. The stranger remained a few steps away, calm and composed. Yet there was a subtle shift in his gaze, a recognition of capability, of potential. Clara realized the ordinary morning she had anticipated had transformed into something extraordinary. The man stepped closer, collected the rifle, and set it down beside her carefully. His movements were deliberate, practiced, yet unassuming. He gave her a brief nod, and for the first time, Clara saw a faint hint of a smile, almost imperceptible, yet it conveyed respect and acknowledgement. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he turned and walked toward the parking area, leaving Clara standing there, heart still racing, mind swirling with possibilities. She watched him disappear into the sunlight, feeling a mix of exhilaration, curiosity, and determination. The quiet morning was over. What had begun as another routine session at the range had become a defining moment, one that would challenge her skill, reshape her focus, and ignite a hunger for more. Clara knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The rifle lay in front of Clara, cold and commanding, gleaming faintly in the morning sunlight. She hesitated, her fingers brushing over the polished metal, feeling its balance and weight. It wasn't just the heft of the weapon that impressed her, it was the history of precision, discipline, and countless hours of skill that it represented. Every line of the rifle screamed expertise, every curve seemed to whisper of focus and training. She felt a sudden electric awareness that today was no ordinary practice session. The seal had stepped back, leaving her to decide, and the silence between them was loaded with expectation. Clara's pulse hammered in her chest, yet a strange clarity took hold. She had faced challenges before, long-distance shots, competitions, even tense situations on the range, but nothing like this. This was a test not just of skill, but of composure, intuition, and trust. The stranger's quiet confidence hung over her, almost tangible. She inhaled, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, and slowly lifted the rifle. It felt heavier than her personal firearm, yet perfectly balanced. The stock pressed against her shoulder naturally, the barrel aligned with her line of sight as if it were an extension of her own body. Clara took a tentative aim at the closest target, aware that every movement was under observation. The rifle's mechanisms were smooth, almost too precise, and her fingers instinctively adjusted to the trigger. The first shot cracked sharply, echoing across the range, startling a pair of distant birds into flight. Clara's stomach jumped, but the bullet hit the steel target with authority. Her eyes widened in surprise, a thrill rushing through her veins. She had expected power, yes, but the controlled precision of that first impact exceeded even her imagination. She lowered the rifle slightly, exhaling slowly, letting the adrenaline flow through her without overwhelming her. The seal remained still, calm, his presence unwavering. He didn't offer praise. His approval was silent, measured, but Clara felt it in the faint narrowing of his eyes, in the subtle shift of his stance. She understood that this was a professional acknowledgement, the kind that couldn't be given lightly. For a brief moment, she realized the enormity of the trust he had placed in her by simply stepping back and leaving the weapon in her hands. Clara adjusted her stance, recalling every lesson she had learned over years of shooting. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, weight evenly distributed. She held the rifle close to her body, elbows tucked, her cheek resting against the stock. Every movement was deliberate, a practiced dance of balance and control. She exhaled and squeezed the trigger again. The bullet struck the steel target with pinpoint accuracy. A smile threatened to break across her face, but she restrained it. Focus was paramount. The seal finally spoke, his voice calm, controlled, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Adjust your elbows. Anchor them. Power comes from your base, not just your hands. Clara listened, absorbing every syllable. His instructions were precise, without embellishment. She adjusted as he directed, feeling the rifle respond more smoothly. Her shots became more consistent, each one a reaffirmation of control and confidence. It was a strange sensation, simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. He remained nearby, neither hovering nor distant, allowing her to find her rhythm. The subtle shift of his presence reminded her of the silent mentorship in martial arts, where a teacher guides without interference, letting the student discover their own strength. Clara felt a deep respect for him, and a growing awareness of her own potential. She realized that the rifle was not merely a tool, it was a conduit, channeling her focus, patience, and skill into tangible results. Minutes passed, each shot sharpening her focus, each correction from the seal refining her technique. Clara's breathing synchronized with the rifle's rhythm, a meditative flow that heightened her awareness of every muscle, every breath, every heartbeat. The wind remained minimal, the targets perfectly aligned, and yet the challenge felt immense. The presence of someone trained to notice every detail pushed her to exceed her own expectations. She was no longer practicing, she was performing. The SEAL's observations were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet Clara sensed their intent. His eyes followed every twitch of her fingers, every shift in posture, every inhale and exhale. Occasionally, he would tilt his head slightly, a silent suggestion, prompting her to correct without a word. She realized the genius of his method. Trust combined with observation, guidance without interference. It demanded self-awareness, humility, and courage, a combination Clara had not tested in herself before. Feeling a surge of confidence, she aimed at the farthest target. Her hands were steady, her stance firm, and her mind clear. The shot rang out, precise and controlled, striking the bullseye dead center. Clara's chest swelled with a quiet satisfaction. The seal nodded faintly, an acknowledgement of her capability. She had proven herself not just to him, but to herself. In the briefest moment, their silent bond had shifted from mere observation to mutual respect. Clara lowered the rifle for a short break, her muscles pleasantly fatigued, her mind buzzing. With focus and awareness, she glanced at the seal, who remained a few steps back, calm and composed, giving her space, yet remaining an unwavering presence. She could sense the discipline in his posture, the quiet mastery in every gesture. It was humbling yet inspiring. She realized she had never encountered someone who could teach so much without uttering more than a few words. After a moment, the seal stepped closer, offering a few additional tips in his measured, concise tone. Focus on follow-through. Don't anticipate the recoil. Let the rifle do its work. Visualize the shot before you squeeze. Clara nodded, mentally noting each instruction, feeling the rifle respond more naturally than ever. Each correction brought her shots closer to perfection. Each suggestion an insight into mastery, discipline, and control. Clara could feel herself evolving with each moment, her previous notions of skill and capability expanding. She had approached the range expecting another routine morning, a solitary practice of habits she had honed over years. Instead, she was experiencing an entirely new level of intensity and focus, guided by someone who demanded excellence silently. She felt the weight of potential in her hands, the thrill of growth in her mind, and the quiet exhilaration of trust. Finally, after what felt like hours but was merely minutes, Clara took a deep breath and lowered the rifle. Her hands tingled from exertion and adrenaline, but her mind was alive with clarity and excitement. The seal nodded faintly, a gesture that spoke more than words ever could. Clara realized the first true moment of trust had been established, not through conversation, not through ceremony, but through shared focus, precision, and silent acknowledgement. She placed the rifle carefully on the table, reverently, and looked up. The stranger's gaze met hers for the briefest instant, conveying recognition, respect, and approval. And then, as silently as he had arrived, he took a step back, allowing her to absorb the experience fully. Clara felt a wave of exhilaration, realization, and newfound confidence wash over her. For the first time, she understood that today would not end with routine practice. The ordinary world she had known, the calm, measured mornings at the range had shifted. She had touched something extraordinary, felt the weight of trust, and glimpsed the potential of her own skill. And somewhere deep inside, Clara knew this was only the beginning. Clara lowered the rifle to her shoulder once more, her pulse steadying yet alert. The seal had stepped back slightly, giving her space, but his presence remained palpable, a silent benchmark of expectation. She inhaled deeply, feeling the morning. Air filled her lungs and centering herself. Every muscle in her body tightened and released in preparation. Today was no ordinary practice. Every shot would be a test, not just of aim, but of focus, control, and awareness. She knew instinctively that he would notice every nuance. She scanned the targets carefully. The closest ones were familiar, trivial even, but the farther still. Targets posed a challenge. They were small, set at a distance she hadn't attempted before. She had studied ballistics and trajectory extensively, but theory was nothing without execution. Clara adjusted her stance, feet planted firmly, back straight, elbows anchoring the rifle against her shoulders. The metal felt cold, almost alive. In her hands, as though it were aware of the challenge ahead, the seal remained silent, observing. There was no need for words. His presence alone guided her. Clara felt a strange combination of tension and calm, a paradox she had never experienced at the range before. It was the kind of focus that demanded complete awareness of self and surroundings. Every subtle shift in wind, every fraction of recoil, every micro-adjustment in grip mattered. She realized that this moment was not only a test of skill, but also a lesson in awareness. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar rhythm of preparation. Inhale, steady, aim, exhale, squeeze. Her first shot at the farthest target rang sharply, striking the steel with a satisfying clang. She barely allowed herself to smile, knowing that perfection was not the goal, consistency was. She adjusted her stance, recalculated the angle, and fired again. Another precise hit. Her heart raced with exhilaration, but her mind remained calm, analyzing each motion, each decision. The rifle felt like an extension of her own body. The seal finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. Your breathing is steady, but anticipate less. Visualize the shot, then let go. The rifle will do the rest. Clara nodded, absorbing the guidance like a student in a masterclass she hadn't expected to attend. She exhaled slowly, focusing entirely on the mechanics of sight, trigger, and posture. The next round of shots was smoother, more controlled, each bullet landing with increasing precision. She felt an unfamiliar pride, a deep recognition of growth in real time. Time seemed to slow. Clara's mind tuned into every detail, the subtle sway of her stance, the faint breeze across her cheeks, the metallic scent of the rifle and targets, the distant calls of birds startled by the echo of gunfire. The world outside this bubble faded. She existed only in the precise alignment of barrel, sight, and target. And yet, the seal's silent presence reminded her that this was not about solitude. It was about performance under observation, learning, and trust. A particularly distant target caught her attention, smaller than the others, placed at an angle that required perfect calculation. Clara's pulse quickened. Her fingers adjusted slightly on the grip. Her cheek rested firmly against the stock, and her shoulders squared. She exhaled, aiming, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out with authority, striking the steel dead center. A thrill surged through her body. She felt exhilaration, accomplishment, and the quiet satisfaction of precision all at once. The seal nodded faintly, the faintest sign of acknowledgement. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but Clara recognized it as approval. She had passed her first real test under his observation. And yet, there was no relief, no sense of completion. His gaze remained intent, signaling that there were higher levels to achieve, subtler skills to master, and deeper awareness to cultivate. Clara realized that what had begun as a simple exercise in marksmanship had transformed into a profound lesson in discipline, patience, and control. Her next few shots became more methodical. Each time she exhaled, she visualized the bullet traveling, imagining the steel target and the sound it would make. She focused on follow-through, on the subtle pressure of the trigger, on maintaining her balance. Her muscles, guided by hours of previous practice, reacted instinctively, yet her mind remained sharply analytical. Clara had entered a state of flow, fully immersed, fully aware, fully alive. The seal finally moved slightly closer, observing her posture, the position of her arms, the alignment of her shoulders. When he spoke, it was concise, impactful. Your stance is improving, but your awareness must expand. Notice everything, the wind, the angle, the subtle tension in your arms. Control begins with attention. Clara nodded again, silently internalizing each word. She realized that the lesson was no longer about hitting targets. It was about awareness, control, and the ability to perform under scrutiny. Another distant target, barely visible, demanded her attention. Clara felt her chest tighten with anticipation, yet she welcomed the challenge. She adjusted her footing, recalculated trajectory, and fired. The bullet struck true, ringing out like a bell across the range. She exhaled, a combination of relief, pride, and exhilaration washing over her. The seal's presence, far from intimidating now, felt like a guiding anchor. She had begun to understand the essence of trust, not just in him, but in herself, in her skills, and in the rifle. Minutes turned into an hour, yet it felt like mere moments. Clara's focus sharpened with every shot, every correction, every subtle tip from the seal. She was no longer merely practicing. She was performing at a level she hadn't believed possible. Her movements were precise, fluid, and instinctive. Yet her mind remained fully engaged, analyzing, learning, and improving. She felt an extraordinary connection between body and rifle, an almost symbiotic relationship of control and intent. Finally, she lowered the rifle, her hands tingling from exertion but steady. Her breathing was controlled, her heart racing with exhilaration, yet tempered by focus. The seal stepped closer, nodding faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of her progress. Clara realized that this first serious challenge had been more than a test of skill. It had been a lesson in patience, awareness, and trust. She had glimpsed the depths of her own potential, guided silently by someone who had chosen to trust her implicitly. As she reloaded her rifle for one final set of shots, Clara felt a profound shift within herself. The ordinary world she had known, the routine of practice, the quiet mornings at the range, had changed irrevocably. She had touched something extraordinary, experienced the thrill of skill, precision, and awareness intertwined. The seal's guidance had illuminated the path to mastery, and Clara felt both humbled and inspired. She was no longer the same shooter who had arrived that morning. She was evolving, growing, and awakening to the power of focus, control, and discipline. The distant targets still beckoned, challenging her, teasing her with their precise difficulty. Clara smiled slightly, a spark of determination in her eyes. The first moment of trust had been established. The first real challenge had been overcome, and the path ahead stretched out with infinite possibilities. She was ready to push further, to refine her skill, to embrace the lessons that the silent seal had begun to impart. And somewhere deep within, she knew this was only the beginning of her transformation. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow, feeling the morning sun warming her shoulders, though the adrenaline in her veins kept her fully alert. The distant targets seemed even farther now, the angles more demanding, their bullseyes smaller than anything she had attempted before. She held the rifle in her hands again, feeling the cold metal against her cheek, the weight solid and precise. Every movement had to be deliberate. Every shot required full control of her body, mind, and breath. This was no longer practice. It was a test of skill and composure under pressure. The seal observed silently, standing a few feet back, his eyes scanning her posture, stance, and alignment. He had said little in recent minutes, and Clara realized that was intentional. His quiet presence amplified her awareness, forcing her to focus, to anticipate every nuance, to maintain calm, even as her heartbeat raced. This was a higher level than any she had experienced before, a challenge, not just of marksmanship, but of mental fortitude. Clara positioned herself, feet shoulder-width apart, knees bent slightly, rifle balanced firmly against her shoulder. She raised it to her line of sight, adjusting the scope carefully. Her fingers rested lightly on the trigger, each joint poised and ready. She exhaled slowly, centering herself, visualizing the path the bullet would take. The world narrowed, leaving only the target, the rifle, and the rhythm of her breathing. Every distraction faded. Her body felt connected to the rifle, an extension of her own will. She aimed at the farthest steel target, barely visible against the backdrop of trees. The distance made every tiny detail matter the slightest wind. The subtlest shift in stance, even the pressure of her grip. Clara's pulse quickened. She focused entirely on the mechanics: sight, aim, trigger, follow-through. The SEAL's eyes followed her movements like a hawk, noticing the smallest micro-adjustments. Clara exhaled, squeezed the trigger gently, and felt the rifle recoil naturally against her shoulder. The bullet struck true, clanging sharply against the metal. Her chest tightened with a mixture of exhilaration and relief. The SEAL finally spoke, calm, precise. "Good. Now anticipate less, trust more. Your mind is racing ahead of your body." Clara nodded, taking a slow, deliberate breath. His words resonated. She realized that her own overthinking had been a barrier, subtle but persistent. A challenge wasn't just hitting the target. It was trusting herself, her instincts, her preparation. She aimed again, letting the rifle do its work, rather than trying to control every variable consciously. The bullet rang true again, and Clara felt an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment ripple through her. The next few shots tested her endurance and focus. Each shot required the same intense awareness, the same calm precision, yet each carried its own challenge-line shifts. Subtle distractions, the fatigue of holding the rifle steady over time. Clara could feel her muscles burning slightly, but her mind remained razor-sharp. Every adjustment she made felt deliberate, almost instinctual. She had entered a state of flow where body, mind, and weapon moved in perfect synchrony. The SEAL's gaze remained intense but unobtrusive. He didn't correct her constantly. Instead, he allowed her to find her rhythm, intervening only when necessary. Clara recognized the genius in this method. She was learning not just skill, but resilience, the ability to maintain focus, adapt to new challenges, and trust herself. Under observation, the challenge within wasn't just external. It was deeply personal, testing her confidence and discipline in ways she hadn't anticipated. A particularly distant target, half hidden behind foliage, caught her attention. Her heartbeat surged with anticipation. This was the ultimate test, so far a target that demanded perfect alignment, careful calculation, and absolute composure. She inhaled slowly, adjusted her stance, and visualized the bullet's path. The SEAL's quiet presence was a constant anchor, guiding without words. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the bullet flew. A sharp clang echoed across the range, and she exhaled in relief. She had done it. Her arms trembled slightly from exertion, but the satisfaction of accomplishment coursed through her veins. The SEAL nodded faintly, in acknowledgement of her capability. For the first time, Clara felt a deep connection to her own skill, realizing that she had not only met the challenge, but had internalized the lessons of awareness, precision, and trust. This was more than practice. It was a transformation. She lowered the rifle for a brief moment, wiping sweat from her hands. Her muscles ached pleasantly, and her mind buzzed with exhilaration. Clara could feel the shift within herself. Quiet confidence that comes from meeting a challenge head-on and mastering it. She realized she was no longer simply practicing. She was performing at a level she hadn't believed possible. Her skills, her focus, and her mental fortitude had all been elevated. The SEAL stepped closer, finally speaking again. Control comes from awareness, not force. Your mind must observe. Your body executes. Every shot is a decision, not a reaction. Clara absorbed each word, feeling the weight and truth in them. She had thought her practice was about hitting targets, but now she understood it was about control, awareness, and mastering herself under pressure. Each shot was not just a test of aim, it was a test of her discipline, patience, and clarity. Clara picked up the rifle again for another round. The targets seemed almost smaller now, though they were physically the same. She felt her confidence rise, her movements more deliberate and precise. She visualized each shot, focused on her breathing, and let instinct take over. Every bullet struck its mark with increasing consistency. She could feel her awareness expanding, her understanding of rhythm, balance, and control deepening. She realized the challenge wasn't simply external, it was internal, and by mastering it, she was transforming herself. As the morning progressed, Clara's focus intensified. The range seemed suspended in time, a world of steel targets, precise mechanics, and disciplined movement. Every shot became a lesson, every adjustment a discovery. She had moved beyond routine practice into a realm where trust, skill, and awareness converged. The SEAL's quiet guidance, paired with her own effort and determination, had pushed her to heights she hadn't imagined. Finally, she lowered the rifle, breathing deeply, feeling the exhaustion of effort combined with the exhilaration of accomplishment. Her body was tired, her mind buzzing with awareness and insight. She glanced at the SEAL, who remained a few steps back, calm and composed, a silent acknowledgement of her progress. Clara understood that she had met her first major challenge, learned invaluable lessons about awareness, and discovered reserves of focus and skill she had not known existed. For the first time that morning, Clara allowed herself a small smile, a quiet celebration of her success. She had stepped into the unknown, faced the challenge within, and emerged stronger, more aware, and more confident. The SEAL's trust had ignited something in her, a desire to push further, to master her skill, and to embrace challenges with clarity and focus. Today had begun as a simple morning at the range, but now it had become a turning point, a defining moment in her journey. Clara knew that this was only the beginning. The challenge within had been met, but greater lessons awaited. She was no longer just a shooter. She was a student of focus, discipline, and awareness. The morning sun had risen higher now, bathing the range in warmth, but Clara felt a fire within her, a drive to continue, to improve, and to honor the trust placed in her. The path ahead was unknown, yet exhilarating, and she welcomed it wholeheartedly. The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the outdoor range, but Clara hardly noticed. Her body was warm, slightly fatigued from the exertion of repeated shots, yet her mind was alive with focus and awareness. She lowered the rifle, letting the cool metal rest on the table, and took a deep breath. The SEAL, standing a few steps back, observed silently, a quiet presence that anchored her awareness. Clara realized the encounter had shifted something fundamental. Today was no longer about steel targets or precise aim, it was about herself. She watched him, trying to understand the depth of his quiet guidance. The SEAL's eyes had observed every nuance of her posture, every micro-adjustment of her grip, every subtle twitch of tension in her body. He had said little, yet every lesson was clear: control, awareness, patience, trust, and composure. Clara realized that shooting was merely the conduit. The rifle, the targets, the range, they were tools for teaching something far deeper. Every shot you take is more than a bullet, the SEAL finally said, his voice calm, measured, yet undeniably commanding. It's a decision. Every movement, every adjustment, every breath carries meaning. Control your mind, your body will follow. Awareness isn't just seeing the target, it's seeing yourself in the process, understanding the smallest detail, and mastering it. Clara nodded, absorbing every word, feeling the weight of meaning behind each syllable. These weren't just instructions for marksmanship. They were principles she could apply to life itself. She thought back to the morning, when she had first taken the rifle in her hands. How nervous, uncertain, and exhilarated she had felt. Now, after hours of practice and guidance, she noticed a difference. Not just in her skill, but in herself. Her posture, her breathing, her thought process had shifted. She was calmer, yet sharper, more aware of her surroundings, more confident in her decisions. Every shot had taught her focus. Every adjustment had taught her patience. Clara picked up the rifle again, though now she approached it differently. The metal felt less intimidating, more like an extension of her own body, her awareness and intuition guiding every movement. She aimed at a mid-range target, exhaling slowly, steadying her heartbeat, letting instinct and preparation converge. The shot hit its mark perfectly. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not just because of precision, but because she recognized her own growth. Skill was secondary. Awareness was primary. The SEAL stepped closer, not to intervene, but to provide insight. Control is awareness. Awareness is clarity. Clarity gives you freedom to act decisively. These principles don't end here, Clara. They extend beyond the range, beyond the rifle, beyond the obvious. Life is a series of decisions, some small, some life-altering. Training your mind to remain calm, to focus, and to act deliberately will serve you in every situation. His words resonated deeply, and Clara felt a profound understanding settle within her. She considered her own life, the routines, the anxieties, the subtle moments of hesitation and doubt. All of them suddenly seemed clearer, all of them approachable, with the same principles she had just applied on the range. Patience, focus, observation, trust in preparation. These were universal skills, and she had learned them in a few intense hours, under the gaze of someone who demanded excellence without a word. The realization was transformative. Clara lifted the rifle again, aiming at a distant target hidden partially behind foliage. The shot rang sharply, and she exhaled, feeling a combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her muscles were tired, but her mind was awake, fully alive to every sensation. The SEAL nodded faintly, a silent acknowledgement of her mastery of the moment. Clara felt a quiet gratitude, not just for the instruction, but for the perspective it had given her. She realized that mastery of skill was inseparable from mastery of self. He spoke again, guiding her without pressing. You've learned more than shooting today. You've learned discipline, patience, awareness, and composure. Remember that these skills transfer. They prepare you for moments when precision matters, when calm matters, when decision-making matters. Clara let the words settle in her mind, replaying the lessons silently. Every instruction, every subtle correction, every silent observation had led her to this point, a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. For the first time, she felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond the morning's thrill or the satisfaction of precise marksmanship. She understood the trust placed in her, the responsibility she had embraced, and the potential she had unlocked. The SEAL's presence had been both challenge and mentorship, a balance of observation and guidance that forced her to elevate herself. She realized that lessons were not just learned through explicit instruction. They were absorbed through experience, reflection, and engagement. Clara lowered the rifle, letting the metal rest carefully on the table, and stepped back. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was racing with insight. Every sensation from the morning, the sun on her skin, the smell of gunpowder, the subtle weight of the rifle, the echo of bullets striking steel, was now tied to a deeper understanding. She had learned not just to shoot, but to focus, to observe, and to trust herself in every decision. The SEAL studied her for a long moment, quiet and still. Finally, he spoke in that low, measured tone that carried so much authority. You're ready to take these lessons beyond the range. Remember, control, awareness, patience, composure. Apply them to life as rigorously as you applied them here. Every challenge you face will demand these skills. You now know that you can meet them. Clara nodded, feeling a profound sense of clarity and responsibility. She looked back at the targets, the range, and the quiet morning that had evolved into something transformative. She realized that her growth was only beginning. The lessons she had absorbed, the focus, the trust, the discipline would serve her far beyond the steel targets and the echo of gunfire. She felt empowered, capable, and awake to the possibilities of her own potential. As the SEAL began to gather his gear, Clara reflected on the depth of the encounter. It had started as an ordinary morning, a routine practice session, and evolved into an intensive, immersive lesson in skill, awareness, and self-mastery. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenge, and had emerged stronger, more focused, and aware. The rifle was no longer just a tool. It was a mirror reflecting her abilities, her control, and her potential. Before leaving, the SEAL gave her a nod, brief, deliberate, full of quiet respect. Clara felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She understood that this moment was rare, almost sacred. It wasn't just the skills she had learned, but the wisdom, the discipline, and the insight into her own capabilities. She would carry these lessons far beyond the range, into every task, challenge, and decision she faced. Clara packed her rifle and gear carefully, feeling a sense of reverence. Every motion was deliberate, echoing the lessons she had absorbed. She walked to her car with the SEAL beside her briefly, sharing no words, only a mutual acknowledgement of understanding. The parking lot seemed brighter, the sun warmer, and the world wider. She knew that her life had shifted in subtle but profound ways. Even as she drove home, the lessons continued to resonate. Every turn, every break, every decision felt informed by the morning's experience. She had touched a deeper level of awareness, discipline, and focus, and she understood that this transformation was ongoing. The range had been a crucible, and she had emerged refined, empowered, and ready. Clara smiled faintly to herself, a quiet, reflective smile. Today had begun as an ordinary session, but it had ended as a revelation. She had learned not just to shoot, but to see herself clearly, to trust her instincts, to embrace patience and focus, and to recognize her own potential. She knew this was only the beginning of a journey far beyond the range. Guided by the lessons of awareness, discipline, and composure she had absorbed today. Clara stood at the edge of the range, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the targets and gravel. Her arms ached pleasantly from hours of holding the rifle, yet the fatigue was almost secondary to the energy coursing through her mind. She had spent the entire morning and early afternoon immersed in a whirlwind of focus, precision, and awareness. The steel targets no longer represented mere points to hit. They were symbols of every lesson she had absorbed: patience, composure, trust, and self-mastery. The SEAL stepped closer, moving with that silent, precise grace that had captivated her attention since the morning. He carried his gear with efficiency, every motion deliberate, every gesture calculated yet natural. Clara watched him, realizing the depth of what she had experienced. He had guided her without pressure, judged her without words, and taught her more than she had imagined possible in a single session. Her mind reflected on each subtle correction, each silent observation, and each fleeting nod of approval. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was still, save for the distant rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the world beyond the fenced range. Clara felt a wave of gratitude, mixed with awe. This encounter had started as an ordinary morning, but it had become transformative. She had touched her potential, seen the limits of her skill, and felt them expand under the watchful eye of someone who demanded excellence through silent mentorship. Finally, the seal spoke, his voice low, deliberate, carrying the quiet authority that had defined the day. You've learned more than shooting today. Remember that control, awareness, and patience extend beyond this range. Apply them in every decision you face. Clara nodded, absorbing the words fully. They resonated not as instruction, but as a profound truth, a guide, not just for skill, but for life itself. Clara glanced down at the rifle resting on the table. She had handled it with care, respect, and focus, and it had taught her more than she could have anticipated. The seal had handed it to her without expectation of perfection, yet she had discovered excellence through trust and discipline. Every shot had been a test, every adjustment a lesson, and every moment a mirror reflecting her growth. She felt an intimate connection to the weapon, to the range, and to the silent mentor who had guided her. The seal stepped back slightly, allowing her to process the moment fully. Clara felt the weight of unspoken communication between them, the respect, the acknowledgement, and the subtle bond formed through shared focus and intensity. She realized that trust had been at the center of this experience, his trust in her abilities and her trust in herself. It was a rare, quiet understanding that transcended words, a moment she would carry with her long after the range had been cleared. He reached into his gear and produced a small, nondescript notebook. "A few notes for your reference," he said, placing it on the table. Clara picked it up, turning the pages carefully. There were diagrams, tips, and concise observations, some technical, some philosophical. Each note reflected the principles he had silently taught: awareness, discipline, composure, and trust. She realized that this was more than a guide for marksmanship. It was a guide for life, a blueprint for approaching challenges with precision and mindfulness. Clara felt a swell of gratitude and determination. She realized that the lessons extended far beyond bullets and targets. Every aspect of her day, her work, her interactions, and her own self-discipline could benefit from the principles she had learned today. The seal had given her more than technique. He had given her insight, awareness, and a framework for excellence that she could apply in countless ways. The seal began to gather his rifle, his movements efficient yet unhurried. Clara watched, aware that the end of this encounter was near. She felt a pang of something she hadn't expected, the bittersweet weight of parting. The morning had been extraordinary, but now she faced the quiet void of solitude, with only memories, lessons, and personal transformation as companions. Yet, she knew she was changed. The experience had illuminated her potential, and the path ahead felt wider, brighter, and more defined than ever. Before turning to leave, he paused and gave her one final gesture, a nod, deliberate, carrying the gravity of recognition and respect. Clara returned the gesture, understanding its weight. It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was affirmation. She had met the challenge, absorbed the lessons, and demonstrated both discipline and potential. The silent communication between them carried more meaning than any conversation could. She felt a deep, profound respect for him and for herself. As he walked away toward the parking lot, Clara's gaze followed every step. She noticed the controlled rhythm of his movement, the quiet confidence in every motion. There was something almost ceremonial in the way he departed, not flamboyant or dramatic, but deliberate, purposeful, and dignified. Clara realized that the entire encounter had been a lesson in subtlety as much as skill, precision in action, restraint in display, and power conveyed through composure rather than words. Alone now, Clara exhaled slowly, letting the tension and focus of the day wash away gradually. The rifle rested on the table beside her, a symbol of the morning's lessons, the silent guidance, and the trust she had earned. She ran her fingers over the smooth metal once more, feeling the weight and balance, but also the intangible lessons it represented. Every shot, Every correction, every careful adjustment was now etched in her memory as more than skill. They were reflections of growth, awareness, and discipline. She walked along the range slowly, absorbing the sights and sounds one final time. The sun had shifted, casting shadows that elongated across the gravel and grass. Clara felt the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment, tempered with the humility of knowing there was still much to learn. The seal's lessons had been profound, yet the true challenge would be applying them beyond the controlled environment of the range. She understood now that mastery of skill required mastery of self, and that journey had only just begun. Clara sat briefly on a nearby bench, letting her thoughts settle. She replayed the morning's events in her mind. The initial tension, a moment the rifle had been handed to her, the first shots, the silent observation, the gradual growth in confidence and awareness. Every detail, from the precise adjustments of her stance to the subtle nods of the seal, carried meaning. She realized the encounter had been as much about internal growth as external skill, a rare and precious gift. Her thoughts drifted to the future. How could she carry this awareness into her work, her daily routines, and her interactions? The lessons she had learned, patience, focus, observation, composure, and trust, were universally applicable. She felt a quiet determination to practice them, not just on the range, but in every aspect of her life. The rifle, the targets, and the morning sun would always remind her of what was possible when discipline, trust, and awareness converge. As Clara finally gathered her gear and prepared to leave, she felt a sense of completion and transformation. The seal's departure had left an imprint, an invisible yet undeniable presence that would guide her long after the range had emptied. She realized that true mentorship was not about constant instruction, but about creating the space for growth, trust, and self-discovery. And in that realization, Clara found a sense of quiet empowerment, knowing she had absorbed something far greater than skill alone. Walking to her car, Clara glanced back one last time. The range was quiet now, the steel target still gleaming in the fading sunlight. She felt a deep, abiding respect for the seal and for herself. The parting gesture, the nod, the silent acknowledgement, the trust had transformed the ordinary morning into a moment of profound meaning. Clara understood that the lessons of today would stay with her forever, shaping not just her marksmanship, but the way she approached life itself. The sun had fully descended toward the horizon, casting the range in the warm, golden hues of late afternoon. Clara packed her gear carefully, her movements deliberate and reflective, each motion echoing the lessons she had learned. The rifle rested in its case, but its weight no longer felt merely physical. It carried the symbolic weight of discipline, focus, and trust. Clara paused for a moment, letting the quiet of the empty range envelop her, aware of how profoundly the day had altered her perception of herself and her potential. Driving home, Clara replayed the events in her mind. Every shot, every correction, every subtle nod or instruction from the seal resonated deeply. She thought about the initial moment he had handed her the rifle, the first test of her composure, and the gradual shift from nervousness to confidence. What had begun as routine practice had evolved into a profound exercise in focus, awareness, and self-trust. Each memory reinforced a truth she hadn't known before. Skill was only valuable when paired with discipline and mental clarity. As the streets passed by in the fading light, Clara reflected on her life outside the range. Her daily routines, decisions, and challenges suddenly seemed more manageable, framed by the lessons of patience, observation, and self-control. The seal's guidance had transcended marksmanship. It had instilled a philosophy that could be applied to every facet of her life. She realized that true mastery of skill, or self-required intention, patience, and trust in both preparation and instinct. The insights she had gained would not remain confined to the range. They would ripple through her actions, choices, and mindset. At home, Clara set the rifle carefully on its stand, giving it a final glance. The object, once a tool, now symbolized a deeper understanding of herself. She could feel the subtle tension in her shoulders from hours of practice, yet it was tempered with exhilaration and pride. Her mind buzzed with awareness. She was sharper, calmer, and more focused than she had been that morning. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible to an outside observer, yet undeniable to her. The experience had left an indelible mark on her consciousness. Clara sat at her kitchen table, notebook open, reflecting on the seal's words. Control comes from awareness. Awareness gives clarity. Clarity allows decisive action. Each phrase resonated as both instruction and philosophy. She scribbled notes, not just technical observations about posture or rifle mechanics, but personal reflections about discipline, patience, and self-trust. The exercise of writing reinforced the lessons, embedding them in both memory and intention. Clara realized that learning was only complete when actively applied, internalized, and transformed into conscious practice. Evening settled in, but Clara remained awake, her thoughts alive with possibilities. She thought about her future practice. Sessions, now infused with purpose and intent. She no longer aimed for simple targets. She aimed for mastery, precision, focus, and awareness, fused into a seamless practice. Each shot would not merely measure skill, but reflect her understanding of control, composure, and conscious decision-making. The day had reshaped her perception of training. It was no longer repetition, but an exploration of potential, both technical and personal. The next morning, Clara arrived at the range with renewed energy. The targets were the same, the rifles unchanged, yet her approach had transformed entirely. She moved with intentionality, aligning her body, mind, and weapon in a rhythm that felt natural and deliberate. Each breath, each adjustment, each squeeze of the trigger was informed by the lessons of the previous day. Her confidence was no longer tentative. It was grounded in awareness and preparation. Clara realized she was no longer practicing for performance. Alone she was cultivating mastery, both of skill and of self. As she fired shot after shot, she noticed a subtle shift within herself. The tension that had accompanied her first sessions had melted into calm, steady focus. Her awareness expanded beyond the immediate target, encompassing her stance, surroundings, and even her thoughts. She understood that mastery was not perfection, but deliberate attention to each detail, each motion, and each decision. Clara's mind and body moved in unison, responding instinctively yet consciously to every variable. The rifle was no longer a tool. It was an extension of herself, a conduit for awareness and precision. Clara paused to rest briefly, watching the sun rise higher over the horizon. She reflected on the seal's parting gesture, the silent acknowledgement that had carried more meaning than any words could convey. It was a reminder that mastery required observation, discipline, and trust, and that guidance could come without instruction. She realized that the encounter had not only taught her skill, but had also instilled resilience, the confidence to approach challenges, trust her preparation, and act decisively under pressure. The principles she had absorbed were universally applicable, beyond the range, and into every aspect of her life. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's routine at the range became a meditation in discipline, precision, and awareness. She noticed subtle improvements in her life, calmer decision-making at work, more deliberate attention in personal interactions, and an overall sense of composure in stressful situations. The SEAL's lessons had integrated seamlessly into her mindset, transforming the way she approached challenges, both large and small. Every moment of focused practice reinforced the connection between discipline, awareness, and self-trust. One afternoon, Clara stood at the farthest target, aiming carefully, exhaling slowly, and squeezing the trigger. The bullet struck the center. With authority, the sound echoing across the range. She felt a familiar rush of satisfaction, but it was tempered with reflection. This was not merely about hitting the target. It was about the culmination of focus, trust, and awareness. Every motion, every decision, every breath had contributed to this single, precise act. She smiled faintly, knowing that the journey of mastery was ongoing, endless, and profoundly rewarding. Clara packed her gear for the final time that day, placing the rifle carefully in its case. She glanced around the empty range, feeling a quiet gratitude for the experience that had transformed her so completely. The SEAL's mentorship, the trust, the silent guidance, and the lessons in awareness and discipline had reshaped her understanding of herself and her potential. She understood that mastery was not a destination, but a continuous process, and that the principles she had learned would guide her through every challenge she faced. As Clara drove home, the sun casting long shadows across the landscape, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose she had never known before. The day at the range had started as ordinary, but it had become extraordinary, a turning point that would inform every choice, action, and thought. She realized that the true lesson of the rifle, the targets, and the SEAL's silent mentorship was that mastery of self was inseparable from mastery of skill. Clara arrived home, the familiar streets now imbued with a sense of potential and promise. She carried the lessons in her posture, her awareness, and her mindset. Each decision she would make henceforth would be informed by the principles she had internalized: control, composure, patience, and trust in preparation. The encounter had not only honed her abilities, but had awakened something within her, a profound confidence, a deeper focus, and a readiness to embrace challenges with clarity and precision. Finally, Clara placed the rifle in its secure storage, the metal gleaming softly in the evening light. She sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the journey from uncertainty to mastery, from nervous anticipation to disciplined focus. She knew that life would present countless challenges, but she now possessed a framework for approaching them: awareness, preparation, trust, and deliberate action. The experience had transformed her, not just as a shooter, but as a person capable of focused, disciplined, and confident decision-making. Clara smiled faintly, a sense of quiet fulfillment washing over her. Today was not the end, it was the beginning. The principles she had learned would guide her in every endeavor, every challenge, and every decision. She understood that mastery, awareness, and composure were not gifts, but cultivated skills, honed through focus, discipline, and trust. And with that realization, Clara embraced the new chapter of her life, ready to carry the lessons of the range into every aspect of her world, forever changed by the extraordinary morning she would never forget.